Thank you for coming to the fourth Impulse session organized by the Goethe Institute. And this one is titled Resources, Collectivity, and Long-Term Interdependence. Before starting, I want to remind you of the last Impulse session that's happening next week, so next Wednesday, also at the Beirut Art Center at 6:30 p.m., and that will also be live streamed. And the next one will be about digital platforms and how they are managing to so how they manage to be like a space for resistance. So I want to start this panel. So we have two guests for this panel. We have Aline Khouri and Omar Abi Azar with us. I will introduce them subsequently. But first I want to start by talking a bit about sustainability because it's an obsessive focus, especially for funding bodies and institutions. Since the start, when you start working in an institution or building an institution, you're asked to think of your longevity, your funding strategies, and your long-term sustainability. Except that the way we think about it is always related, it's always in a very narrow perspective and always related to funding and to money. When it is also about community building and the space that you're occupying and building within a community and with a community. So you're asked to adopt techniques and mindsets that are deemed productive by the capitalist economy we're in. So competition, rentability, for example, are considered core managerial values. Growth and project numbers are indicators of success. Same as having very low operational costs, which most of the times means like very low staff or very low money for staffing. So for this session, we wanted to hear from arts professionals about their experience in collective settings, whether it's in networks, groups, or institutions, and how their approach is different in that regard. How they understand that their survival is dependent of the larger ecosystem and how you invest in that. So how can we think of long-term sustainability using the tools, values, and imaginary that collective and horizontal models can provide? So our two speakers will tell you about their experiences and their respective engagement. So online with us, we have Aline Khouri, who's a cultural manager, producer, and researcher living and working from Jerusalem. She's currently the program director of Dar Youssef Nasri Jassir for Arts and Research in Bethlehem. And she's a member of Arts Collaboratory, who's a network or a translocal ecosystem of 25 socially engaged arts organizations. She's interested in exploring alternative ways of working and collaborating together and rethinking institutional structures. And with us, live, physically, is Omar Abi Azar, who's a theater director and founding member of Zukak Theater Company, which he toured around the world. And since 2013, he co-curated Zukak Sidewalks, an international performance festival, and Focus Liban, a platform showcasing and supporting the work of artists residing in Lebanon, among other performances. Since 2008, Omar leads Psychosocial Intervention with Zukak, targeting various communities in different regions of Lebanon and abroad. So that was the introduction. And now we can go to the questions. So I will ask a few questions to the speakers and ask them to answer. And through these questions, they will introduce a bit what is Zukak, what is the Dar Jassir and Arts Collaboratory. And then we will open the floor to questions. So I want to ask, when we talk about interdependence, we talk about the relationship that binds us to other or the other. So it could be other factors, other practitioners, and this allows us to survive and even to strive. So for Omar, I want to ask how Zukak members started to understand their sustainability and that the way to make a living out of their professions is to build and to encourage a whole scene and to expand on that scene.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation and for making a roundtable about sustainability in such a situation that is living Lebanon, which kind of remind me the first days of 2006. 2006 was the year that we created Zukak. At the beginning, we wanted to become like every single theater company, a touring company that will make Shakespeare's or European text, maybe tour a little bit in Lebanon, then tour all around the world, and like becoming normal artists like every artist that we used to look up to. But very fast we were confronted with the reality that is the country that we are living in, which is not only the 2006 Israeli attack on Lebanon, but also the reality of our society, of our government, of our country, which leave you completely alone as an artist. And you're not considered in any way. And this is the first thing that we actually achieved, that we understood what we are. We understood that as artists, as people interested in working in the field of culture in this country, we were completely marginalized professionally and also from the society, that when you tell them, I'm doing experimental theater, they tell you, haram, when are you I hope that someday you will get on TV. That's what my grandma used to say, that's what also a lot of friends used to say. So the word sustainability for us was actually, if someone asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? If I had to think about the 5 next years, I would see myself as an employee in a school or a teacher in a school. But at that moment, I needed to realize my present. What am I at this moment? And the moment we realized in Zukak that us as a group, we exist, but us as individual, we doesn't exist. Because us as a group, you always have the time, you always have at certain point someone that recognizes you as an artist. So the 5, 6 of us were here, at least there was 6 person telling you that you exist. And this was our first step for sustainability. We existed. Then as a group, we decided that, okay, now we cannot make theater in a theater space because it's war. It was 2006, so we needed to be recognized by an audience. So the first thing we told ourselves, now there is people in schools and gardens and parks that have nothing to do. So we said, let's go and tell those people that we exist, since a lot of those people also think that nobody thinks that they exist and they are completely forgotten. So this is how we questioned, we hesitated a lot, saying, no, you cannot go to refugee camps, they have more other priorities. And then when we went with our practice to them, we started theater, and our group and our practice started to exist also, and when we connected to another. This is how we understood that we cannot be alone, and there is nothing that is going to tell you that you exist. We have to create the whole ecosystem of existence, of culture, of the culture of theater in Lebanon. You have to tell me when I speak too much.
Okay.
So this is how we created a whole approach of intervention and what we call psychosocial intervention, where we started to make theater with communities, with refugees in the beginning, then with women subject to domestic violence, and then with Iraqi refugees, Sudanese refugees, everything that came across Lebanon all over this year. Next to that, we managed to make our own performances. So the psychosocial intervention told us that we exist. When we started making our first performance, Hamlet Machine, there was as much people as there is now in the audience, like 20 person the first day. The second day there was no one, we canceled. But we worked for a year for that performance for free. None of us was paid. This is how we understood that, okay, nobody is interested in experimental theater. We are interested in experimental theater. We should not expect the others to be interested in experimental theater. So we started to invite international artists to give workshop. We managed together, but like a very small fund, to invite a German-Japanese Buto dancer. And we invited all the community of practitioners around us to come and take that workshop. It was one workshop of 3 days. We worked like if it was a huge festival to get those 15 persons to take this first workshop of Buto. And we said Buto because it's so absurd for us as an audience. So if our audience practice something that is that absurd and start to understand why at some point we start to dance and shout on stage, maybe they will come to our performances and they will understand what we are trying to do. And this is how actually we started inviting more and more artists from abroad, giving more and more workshops to build an audience and to think with that audience, what can be theater nowadays? And this is how also that we started to build the festival. Because we thought also that, okay, we had the chance and the opportunity to study abroad, to watch performances abroad. Here in Lebanon, there was nothing for theater. There was an international dance festival that was very successful. There was a visual art festival that were very successful. But specifically on theater, nobody used to understand what is a theater play and what is experimental theater as the way we see it. So we started to invite our teachers from universities and our friends that we share a common ground with them in political theater or experimental theater. And this is how we created our first international theater festival. Along that, we said we cannot be the only practitioners in Lebanon, because if there is just Zukak in Lebanon, everybody will say, okay, but they are fine, there is only them. So, and we needed also to have an activity so that people could compare what we are doing with what other people are doing in order to create a reflection and une pensée, a reflection around performing arts. This is why we started supporting other artists, but with very small means, but that was so important for those artists that are beginning, giving them the space that we have. This is how we started producing. We used to give the apartment in which we were rehearsing, and this is how a lot of performances started to go out just because there was a free space to rehearse in. And then little by little, we managed to start being able to support, to co-produce play with financial means. And then now we're developing training of practitioners workshop and mentoring workshop in order to create the whole scene around performing arts in order not to be alone. Because as we started alone and we needed to exist, we know that a lot of artists, especially today, feel completely isolated in a psychological, financial, and maybe also security way, I mean physical security.
Yeah, also in a previous conversation we had, you said that you created a need. So by creating a need, like what you do becomes essential. And thus you will continue to receive funding, to have an audience. And
yes, so when we started working in our psychosocial intervention, at that moment theater and art in this crisis situation was not as evident or was not as present as it is today. NGOs and international humanitarian aid at that moment had a lot of money, and after distributing food, clothes, medicine, and of course didn't want to help more than this, were wondering what can they do with that money. And they wanted at the beginning, they wanted people to go and make shows for kids so that they can entertain them, they can like show their main funders where the money is going. So this is where we said, no, we do not go make animation. So we developed drama therapy tools that had as a purpose not only not therapy as a word. We didn't have the ambition or the arrogance to say we're healing people, but those workshops where we used to go to places where people were in crisis situation in order to give them time and space to think through theater tools, where are they now, where are they coming from, and where they can go. And this space became a necessity, not only in crisis situation, but also within our community of practitioners, because we are all the time in the emergency of trying to find funds in order to be able to pay our rent. So giving space, and now physical space, giving means and saying to other artists that you are not alone and that we can support you, especially in theater where nobody thinks it's a necessity, became a necessity and an evidence for funders, because that space, after being a space to support artists, also became a space of living together. You wanted to ask about the parties, I know. I'm giving you a point of entry. So that space, you want to ask the question?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's at the end, the question about like hosting and...
So that physical space that exploded the 4th of August became a central space in the city very fastly from an eclectic, I like using that word, you're like putting it a bit everywhere, from eclectic groups of people who for them it became essential. We're starting from migrant domestic workers who didn't have a place to do their Christmas party, or the young hipster or LGBTQA++ community that is living around around our studio, used to come to party without having to be scared for their security or for their pocket, because nobody used to oblige anyone to have a drink or to buy a drink, or just to come and hang around other artists, or to come and see if there is a workshop. So it became a community of marginalized people coming to that space. After the 4th of August, and when the space blew up, what sustained that space and what is allowing us to open it at the end of the year again, expanding it, making it bigger, is the credibility that this community of people gave us, and this necessity of having this space not only for the community but also for funders in order to find spaces and projects that respond to their values, which is more and more rare nowadays in Lebanon, because there have been a war on culture from our local mafias. Okay, and the spaces that are still existing are the spaces that are resisting the war on the values that are fighting our local mafia. Not just the local mafia as physical persons, but also the ideologies, the obscurantism that they hold in their project against those kind of places. And this war, we started feeling it way before the 4th of August, when General Security wanted to stop workshop with migrant domestic workers, when 5 different bureaus, General Security, censorship, MERS?
Yeah, in English.
Yeah, the bureaus that deal with prostitution and drugs came to our studio the day that we were organizing a reading within the Beirut Pride, and we started, and now we're feeling. We sense it way more with the assassination of Luqman Slim, or with they stopped very earlier this year a play that was a workshop for students. Censorship came and stopped a workshop for students, the result of a workshop for students. So there's a clear war on this sustainability also. So rather than calling it sustainability, I would call it also how to create the moment with everyone around you.
Yeah, how to create cohesion as well, no? Like, okay, so there's a lot of things to unpack. So I wanted Aline to ask you the same question. So in terms of course, the micro-local community in Bethlehem that you have around Dar Jassir, and the larger community in Palestine, because we know it's like a very scattered territory, which is very difficult to, some parts are very difficult to access, and how you build on solidarity with an international network. You're here.
Thank you, Maria, for this invitation to join the ArtEvolution Impulses program. Screen. Hopefully, I'll be there one day. So Mary Noor introduced me through different roles and responsibilities, I guess, and that's the nature of my work. I work with various organizations and networks. More recently, I joined Dar Jasser for Art and Research, and I'm also a member of Arts Collaboratory. So I'm going to be switching between the two roles or hats over the course of the conversation. For this introduction, I'm going to speak a little bit about Dar Jasser and what we're doing there. Maybe we can put on a slide so I can just give us some images and context for the conversation. Founded by artist Emily Jasser and her sister, filmmaker Jasser. And they come from a longer practice over 20, 30 years with the vision to open up their family home to the public and the town of Bethlehem. It is an independent artist-led space. In that sense, we are a group of artists and creatives that are working together. We all have separate practices, and we use the space as a place to host and create exchanges with artists in the community. We work in different areas in the arts, so every artist that comes with their own practice. So we've hosted dancers, musicians, visual artists, filmmakers, writers. So it can go anywhere in that sense. If we go to the next page, the next slide, Dar Jasser are very, very site specific. We're located in Bethlehem. If you look at the map, the black line is the separation wall. Literally 200 meters from Dar Jasser is watchtower and the wall around us. Right behind us, there's a refugee camp, and across from us, another refugee camp. And the home is like this 1800, this old building made from stone and from the 1880s, historic, that was on the Jerusalem-Hebron road. It was on the main road, and now it's completely blocked off. So what was a 10-kilometer ride straight from Jerusalem now is a much, much longer drive. And what Bethlehem was just on the outskirts of Jerusalem now is completely separated. So that has really isolated Bethlehem. And in the arts community and Ramallah. So the center time, we want to put Bethlehem back on the map a little bit and create an art and cultural community in Bethlehem, in this place in particular. Many people keep telling us it is a problematic road, and it really is. There are a lot of uprising, protests that happen because of its proximity to the separation wall and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. So we do encounter a lot of clashes. So in that sense, we do need to, we program our activities very carefully and sensitively. We also sorry, this is just really unusual to be on the screen, so I'm trying to understand how to do this without hearing you guys. So with Dar Jasser, we really do all sorts of activities and programs, from workshops, master classes, seminars, talks, and the intimacy of our programs is what really what's really important to us. We don't, when we think of sustainability, of course, it's always about numbers, and especially because most of our funding in Palestine, I'm sure the same, on mental aid, and they always look at growth and production. At Dar Jasser, we're very particular. I mean, when I joined in 2019, still early on in the organization's life, it was already the pretext that we are working on longer, and is that we have a core team that we work together, but then there's a community of artists and partners that can come in and out whenever they want to and create projects over longer periods of time. So interdependence in that sense is extremely vital for our existence and our programs in Bethlehem. And I mean, solidarity in that sense played a large role in during the recent events in May, which I can speak about maybe later. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can see a few more slides just to get an idea of the activities that we do on site. Here we have the house, and the terraces were rebuilt, so we can we involve the community, meaning youth, artists, students nearby. Again, this is mainly in Bethlehem. A few people come from outside of the city. Here we built up the terraces, and Muhammad Saleh, a permaculturist, had done created an urban. So here we can see some of the youth from the that came in and worked on the farm for 6 months. Everyone that participates in our projects, we sort of family photograph in front of the house. And the family originally was living in the house. They always used to have family photographs. Continue to home place we do after workshops, and we really do relate to the artists in our community as our family. I mean, even though we're a small, we have a small lifespan so far, we do try to engage artists throughout different workshops, inviting them in to participate, to volunteer, or even present their works. So it's really trying to create a community at the space in particular. During Corona, I mean, we can see a few more slides also just to see some of those. We have some public programs. It's everyone's familiar with the architectures. You can see that it's like a home. These are part of our study groups. Numbers, it's usually smaller groups that we work with over a week, intensive week, or over several months. This was part of a dance workshop. It was an exchange. We had invited artists from San Vito in Italy that did the workshop with Dabke and oud players. So exchanges and bringing in people from outside of Bethlehem or internationally to Bethlehem and try to create synergies and exchanges are very key to our work. Almost one thing I didn't mention actually is that Dar Jasser is an artist residency. So we always host art in our space. And that's where all the magic sort of happens. When an artist comes, we create and facilitate spaces for people to meet and exchange. I can see a few more photos maybe. Events, seminars, and the agriculture program. This was another workshop, and this is Muhammad Saleh again with the urban farm. Yeah, we can stop the slides. Actually, I just wanted to give like a little bit of snippets from our programs. Here, this is a good one. Actually, I was gonna say during Corona and the pandemic, it's something that we sort of thought about before, but we didn't do it because we were so site specific with our programs. But during the pandemic, as everybody, this is very familiar to all of us, to being on Zoom. But it was important to think of community not just on the site, especially when we were locked out of the site, we weren't able to access it, and so on. And each of the members were in different places at the time of the lockdown. We invited former artists to do works and seminars online and to reconnect with participants during those workshops. That was extremely important because there was such a big disconnect. We needed to continue maintaining the communication and care with our community. Very frequently on Zoom, whether as a team and also with the artists. If we go back just one slide. Yeah, and we can stop here for this part of the presentation. But like here, Coco Fusco was supposed to, a Cuban American artist, was supposed to come right at the pandemic. She wasn't able to make it. Literally a day before her flight, the airport was closed down. But she was intending to do connect with the, whether they're trying to master program, anything else in their career paths. So she held tutorials online. So we made sure that even programs that were paused or halted for a short, to continue those conversations. I'll stop there. I'd like to see you guys again, and if you guys have any questions or follow-ups, I'm happy to add.
Now, or we can continue a bit and then have questions. And I can pass to the next one as well that I have. What do you want? Audience, public. Okay. So I wanted also to link two things. I think they're a bit connected, but you can tell me if they are or if they're not. About like what you mentioned, both Omar and Aline, about recently what happened. So in Beirut in August 4th with the explosion and thus the destruction of the Zukak space next to Quarantino. And Aline, I know, like in May, like you mentioned, there was a raid during the repression of the upheavals in Palestine, and also your space was damaged a lot. And I think last time when we were talking, you and me, and also with Omar, you said like, okay, you come into the space that you've built, and you say, I mean, it's happening again. Like everything you've been doing is destroyed, and you're just like, okay, rebuilding, like, okay, that's part of our daily practice as well. And I wanted to link this with, so how not to be resilient in a way. And I wanted to link this with this degrowth practice or term or idea that has come. I don't know if the public, I mean, everyone is familiar with it, but it's a term mainly, I think, that was developed in the economy that has come today to signify a lot of things, but it's mainly a call to change like some of the criteria and indicators of success. So rather than growth and accumulation, we look for quality. For example, because it was developed in economical context, like quality of life. And in the case of arts institutions, so growth, which is what we should all aspire to, it's like accumulating more projects. But instead, if we think about degrowth, it might be to be more thoughtful and impactful, more caring about the relationship we develop, to give them more time, space, and involvement. So I want to ask you how, with what's happening, if has impacted even more like the way you see the rebuilding of, or like how to place and to practice again within an institution.
Yes, it's difficult to compare it with economical and business terms, even though they are quite relevant, growth and degrowth. But when right after the explosion, I think like everyone in Beirut, we had this buffet of adrenaline coming to our heads, and especially that we were in confinement just right before and the revolution and then the explosion, and everybody in the city was like, we're gonna rebuild this city and conquer the world after it, and directly. So we went into this frenzy of work, of trying to reconstruct the space, of doing workshops, of like a huge amount of denial. We even made a festival. Nobody saw that festival, even though it was a huge, but nobody saw it because we were all blinded by the near-death experience that, or actually the death experience that we went through. It's not even a near one. And then we had this like psychological and physical degrowth. We didn't want to do anything anymore. If someone, I think on a round table, someone asked me, and now what to do? And I was like, now we can dig a hole. I want to spend my whole life digging a hole and not doing anything. And this is when we closed the studio. We were wondering, what are we gonna do? I couldn't personally re-enter the studio again. I couldn't re-see the wall, a bit like we are rebuilding and rising from the ashes, like I'm not gonna develop on rising from the ashes. So we didn't want to rise from the ashes, and this is where we gathered and we said, okay, now it's time not to be productive anymore. It's time not to have illusion, not to rebuild our life, our project, like they rebuilt downtown. We don't want illusion in our brains, and we are defeated, and it's not time for productivity. It's time to be useless, to rethink everything, to start from -1, not from 0. And this is how we decided, all of us, to take time. Time not to think, time to observe what happened to us, and time to restart little by little. And it took us a year, and the degrowth for us was that moment where we inflated like the country, like the economy of the country. And growth came little by little, and it started by our ability to re-look at the future, or to rethink the future, or even to re-look at a window without being scared of the window, or to start to re-go at the studio without being scared from the port, or
Okay, but also because, I mean, we've all followed a bit Zukak growth from 2006 until lately, with the space, of course, more and more performance, and I mean, I'm just thinking in terms, is this still your thinking now? I know, for example, you told me we refused some funding when you had to rebuild, and we only accepted fundings that were flexible, that allowed us to exactly take our time, that didn't have us to do report. And a lot of time also with institutions in particular, there is a big pressure in accepting funding when it comes, because you don't know when it will not come. And so also to say no, and to say like, okay, or to say, you give me funding, but for me to be able to regenerate, this is, I think, one step. So I just wanted to think like, would you be more thoughtful about, for example, the funding you would take? Would you be more thoughtful about each step you're going to take?
Also, it's not easy to answer that question, because if I were a younger theater company or a younger institution, I wouldn't answer in the same way I would answer 15 years later, or having the luxury also to speak 15 years later. But yes, at that point, after 15 years, when you notice that the community that is around you, when you notice the core group that you are and the strand that you are in, you can tell yourself, yes, I will still be existing, even without funding. Even if I stop doing performances for 5 years, I will still exist. I can even, it came to our mind like 99% of the people of Lebanon and the artists of Lebanon are either, if we can exist outside of Lebanon, without anything, without just being outside of Lebanon. So yes, we arrived to a certain point where we'd rather not do than do harm, or than even try to see if it will work. And also what happened on the 4th of August, and what is happening also all over the world, that with the COVID situation, we understood that life is too short, not only for us, but for everyone around us. So maybe we want to speak less and make people listen to us less, so that people take their time to live their life, and notice that the vanity of success, the vanity of building castles in the wind.
Yes, I think that will bring us later on to the question about values as well.
I speak a lot in poetry, so if you do not understand the metaphor, maybe I'm only the only one understanding it, tell me.
No, it's fine. And what about you, Aline, with Dar Jasser and...
I very much with Omar. After in May this year, there was lots of protests and on the street in front of Nasser, and there was one night that the Israeli forces raided the house and ransacked it. They got to the roof, and I came the next morning, and it was just completely like destroyed. In that moment, like there was a day where it was all like chaotic and so on, but the following 3-4 months easily were like very depressing. Like just let the I don't want to dig myself a hole. I just want the earth to open and me to fall and disappear. Like I just didn't want to see it or witness it anymore, because I was just getting frustrated. One thing that I could say about degrowth, though, I mean, it's a term that I've been engaged with for some years now. I joined Arts Collaboratory in 2015, and degrowth was part of our values or principles, to go against the mechanisms of production and developmental aid that comes in, that requires us to do all of these festivals and programs and activities and so on. And with Arts Collaboratory, it was really important for all the members to study deeply these terms and values. So degrowth has been something that I've been constantly thinking about from 2015 an animation, and I left because I was wait, sorry, I can hear myself. Sorry. Thank you, Michelle. In 2019, I left the organization because I was burnt out. So when I entered Dar Jasser, for me, I came with this concept like Emily and Marie. I like degrowth is our way to go, and very much so that was their path and line of thought as well. And when the pandemic happened, it sort of, we continued as we were, because we were going at a pace that wasn't meeting with the of funders and so on. We started very much thinking of in terms of sustainability and how to diversify funding, how to minimize our expenses and try to use other resources non-monetary, that can help us sustain ourselves, and charity networks as well. So in that sense, degrowth has been something that follows me all the time, and comes up as well. We really focus on evaluation. We take a whole week in the summer where we review everything, our programs, how we work together, and so on. After every activity workshop, we do sit and evaluate with the participants and ourselves. And this is time from the staff, this is time from artists, and so on. And we really focus on that, and we try to take out there that we can share with funders as our success stories. One of our principles, even though Darjas is not a principle, we don't call it a principle, but one of our definitions of working is also to accept failure. And these failures we openly talk about, try to at least, alongside funders as well. After the events in May, I mean, yeah, degrowth continues, but I think it's what was the med was being in community. If we were alone and we didn't have support from everybody, I would have been able to come out of it. We had community on the ground that came in. We had community internationally that were supporting us, whether campaigns, fundraising campaigns, sending words of solidarity and strength, and so on. All these relationships are so important to keep us going. For me personally, it was a really difficult time. Like for me, I can, like everything Amar said, I completely feel with. But one can also just add to that is that in Palestine, we're almost constantly in a time of crisis. So the events like pandemic, even the pandemic, and that's in May, like every 3-4 months, there's something that happens. It's like this Sisyphus cycle. And I don't know. I don't know how long we continue going through that, but knowing that there's people behind us that support us is really, it keeps, yeah, it gives us a...
So since you evoked Art Collaboratory, maybe I would like for you to tell us more about a bit the I call it family. And also because, yeah, and how they think about exactly degrowth. And you mentioned how they're thinking today around like, abundance instead of scarcity, because there's always this fear that we're always going to lack funding, and instead to look at it from another perspective. So can you tell us more? Okay.
Yes, I can share a little bit more about the Arts Collaboratory Network. Yeah, I think the slide is on. So this is the framework that I actually made 5 years ago. Yeah, so Arts Collaboratory is, we define ourselves as a translocal ecosystem, 25 diverse organizations around the world, focused on art practices, processes of social change, and working with communities. So there's 25 organizations across the world, as you can see, Central and Latin America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and we have partners also in Europe. It started, I won't speak too much because it's a very complex network, but it started off with a core fund, a funder in the Netherlands that wanted to support 25 organizations with the quest of reaching sustainability, with the vision that if they invest in 5 years of funding towards these 25 organizations, they will reach a form or of sustainability. And they also had dedicated a budget or finances, money, for collaborations. They saw this as a little bit of an experiment, like what will we bring like-minded organizations working in the arts across the world together. So we have once a year an assembly. The first one they met in Indonesia, the third year, now it's over 7 or 8. And through these assemblies, connections were built between members. At least 1 or 2 team members would join from each organization. So an assembly would consist of literally 50 people almost together for a period of 10 days. And the first 2 years, at least, were very much talking about what it means to be sustainable, what are the challenges and struggles within each organization. And from there, and the second year, they decided, well, why can't we become an independent network and try to do something different and create change in this art sphere, particularly with funds. And then from there, we sort of wrote out, we call it not a manifesto, but it's like a 60-page plan or future plan, we call it, about our ecosystem. That includes values that bring us together, that we all believe in. And throughout the last 5 years, the organizations did receive core funding, but there's also we sort of transformed into, rather than just granting us separate 24, 25 organizations, to a network, a self-organized and realized network. If we slide. The current image is evolved and transformed in different ways. It's made up of different working groups. So from the 60 or so members in the network, we all participate in different working groups that keep this structure going. So what we can see here, just so we can understand how the relationships are, there's all the members of the network in the middle, and that is made up of all of our resources, monetary, non-monetary, human resources, everything that can make up who we are and what we do. And each of us have an ecosystem, meaning partners, artists, territories, anything that makes up our local context that we're in relationship and with. So although we are the core in this in the network, all of us, it makes up a much, much bigger network of people. And the left side in the blue, on my left side at least, no, that's your right. Anyways, the blue are all project-based working groups. So we have working groups that work that have different study threads, engage with our ecosystem and the partners. And then on the left side, or the red, we have the permanent working groups that need to be there to sustain the network, whether it's communication, whether it's a legal entity, a body that sort of holds the money and the finances to support the network. We have a fundraising working group, so trying to make fundraising a bit fun and creative. So this is just like a little bit of a brief structure or intro about the network. But after 5 years of receiving core, so each organization used to receive a large sum to support it for that year. 2020 marked the year where that fund ended, and we still have a pot of remainless fund was available from the funder. And with that, we sort of started thinking, like, what can we do with our resources, non-monetary, and think, rather than in scarcity, to think in abundance. So we created a new working group called Abundance, where we meet every 2 weeks to hear the struggles or challenges of different organizations, or attends that meeting, and together to see how we can share resources to support each other. Just to give one example of a story that came out from that meetings, there was an open call for a certain grant during the pandemic. So one organization said, they're interested to apply for it, but they didn't really have the human resources or the capacity or the skill set. So we got together during one of these abundance meetings and we wrote out the proposal together. And some others from the network had received that grant before, or had participated with that network previously, or that funder. So we were able to bring in our resources to write out this proposal, and that organization did receive the grant. And in that sense, we saw it, the collective pot that we hold in our bank account is abundant because they didn't necessarily need to access it, but our collective resources enabled that organization to survive that year because of our help into that. More how to support each other now that core funds aren't necessarily available, but how to bring our resources together to support each. And this is just some photos from our assembly in Jordan. Yeah, there's just a few photos just to give a little feeling of how the Arts Collaboratory Network looks like and who's in it. Yeah, so that was just about abundance in that framework, Marinor.
Okay, maybe we continue and then we'll have some time for questions. So I think in previous conversation I had with you and I had with Omar also, you both mentioned, and I know it's a value of Arts Collaboratory, trust. And Omar, you mentioned how actually the fact that it functions so well at Zukak is because the trust that you build. So it's a practice as well and a value, I think. I don't know if you want to tell me more about how trust binds everything together and other values you might have as Zukak that are shared and understood and thus allow the work to flow.
For us, we think being non-judgmental can bring any two person together or any group of people together if we take the judgment out of the relation of an individual to a group, of an individual towards an individual. It's a big statement, but how do we practically do that? Actually, is by practice. And we think hour of practice is what can put people together. And by practice, I mean literally working, spending time together, working on a common or different common project or different project, but it's all about work, and it's not about how to say just spending time together. Because if it's just about spending time together, we will be confronted with our demons that are judgment. I think that what should be done have to be done this way, or I think how we should be is in that way. But if we put everything on the level of practice and work in order to build the project, we notice that the being together is way more efficient, way more meaningful, and the meaning come as an evidence, not as something that you impose. And the leaderships also comes as evidence, not as something that someone take, but as something that, not even as something that someone earned, but as the most efficient and beneficiary for the rest of the group.
And also because you said that when you start a new project, you're generally all paid the same, and thus that means you also have to be all involved the same amount of time, and it changes the relationship, like the power dynamics within the group when you do this. And I guess because it requires more involvement, thus more time and more practice. I don't know.
On a financial level, for example, in Zukak, none of us have a salary. As the founding member of Zukak or artistic direction of Zukak, we don't have a fixed salary. We have hours of work. That means that I get paid by the hour of work for a workshop, for example. It's 4 hours of workshop. I get paid by the hour. So if I don't do a workshop, give a workshop, or make a play, I do not get paid. So this is how we, in general, for Zukak, how we manage with finance in order to keep a certain kind of not a certain kind, I hope a full kind of integrity towards funders, and which give us credibility for funders. And when we make a performance, for example, a production, which you cannot count easily the hours that you are giving, because it's a creative process, and sometimes you go like overnight, and sometimes you arrive at the studio and say, I don't want to work today. So you cannot put the amount of money on it. So what we do, and not just for the practicality of it, but also for the creative process of it, is that everybody present on the project of the production is being paid the same amount. That means that the director is paid the same amount as the light technician, as the same amount as the assistant director. After it, we divide it in lumps of time. That means if the director started a year before, the director and the actor started a year before, they get paid on lumps of time. If the assistant director arrived at the middle of the project, since the beginning of the project, he get paid as much as the director, which makes us also ask for the same amount of involvement from the assistant director to the light technician, to the light also light technical director, so that everybody really feel involved and that he owns that project. And at the end of the day, for our project, for us, it's the result of this collective work. So even if we see the theater director, no, we have the impression that it's Zukak team that made the whole project. After it, who is the director, who is the writer, is a detail among others.
Okay. And Aline, so do you want to say something about the importance and centrality of having principle and ethical values, and how this binds group members together and informs activity?
Yeah.
I mean, personally,
with Arts Collaboratory, for sure, because we actually went through this exercise. I think it was like almost 2 years it took in total to think through like what are our principles, what are our values that we want to maintain within our organizations, with our community, with our partners, and thinking about accountability and so on. So, I mean, I think for me, that was the first place I encountered a process where we're actively writing down and studying what are our ethical principles. For me personally, that really had a large impact on my practice and every work that I do, that I've been doing since since joining Arts Collaboratory. And there it was, it really created the foundations or the basis for these 25 organizations to work together. The second level, which was the following 4 or 5 years, is what Omar refers to as the practice. Like some of those principles were much, much harder to implement, or we had to hold ourselves accountable to them in the network. It's not something that's easy or you can take for granted either. Like writing down ethical principles and having them there. So with every activity in the network, at least, whether it's an assembly when we all gather together, whether it's a small collaborative project, we make sure that there's always a reference to the ethical principles. And in every assembly, we also review them. We remind ourselves what are these principles that we had put down, whether it was 5 years ago or whenever, and we change them, we adapt them to our times and context today. I really enjoyed that process, and it really made me think. Not as myself, I consider myself a cultural manager and organizer, so to actively bring in these principles into practice and to think of them, and not myself as just an employee. I think of myself as a practitioner in in any organization or someone that connects with community, guide us. With trust, it's there also has to be a sense of vulnerability and openness to really be able to gain trust, whether again your colleagues or community. It's like any relationship, like any human family relationship. You have to be, you go through different phases, but it's about communicating and being vulnerable, I feel.
Because also when Aline was speaking, of course, when I say it like this, it seems very easy, but it's actually an exercise that we have to do every time on every project, and according to every crisis situation, we are like starting from the dollar crisis, the inflation crisis, to the fact that we had a studio, we don't have a studio, and the COVID. So it's an exercise that is continual. But what is interesting is that in that exercise, that you understand if our respective government does that exercise, we would be in a real democracy. And what we're trying respectively to do in our cultural institution, most of the cultural institutions that I know, at least in Lebanon, and I'm sure that Jasir Foundation does the same thing also, is that we are trying to practice democracy that states and governments are trying to sell us, but that are not actually practicing. And this is the practice.
What do you think, Aline?
No, I agree. Like with every encounter, we have to remind ourselves of our principles and values and where we want to go. But also collectivity, because Omar is saying that it's the governments that need to be held accountable, or they're the ones that need to be exercising this. Yeah, it's always to remind ourselves. But just thinking with Arts Collaboratory, we've been doing this on a basis between funders and donors. Like we really were able to, with a network, we were able to convince a funder to give us money for 5 years based on trust. They gave us 25 organizations, 50,000 euros a year for 5 years, and they did not ask for any reporting. But we were able to share of our knowledge, because we call something tooling, where we share, our learnings, our failures, our stories, and we really had to build that. It took time to build that. Also, lots of breakthroughs or failures and crises between ours, but the relationship, and we were able to do that at least have their right now, at least, which is to have a funder think of paradigm shift, and all of it was based on trust. And we continue to exercise that, every couple months. The funder is now a member at work. We don't see the funder as separate from us. So it's actually 24 arts organizations, and the 25th is the funder. So they're in conversation with us. They're involved in the different working groups, and they're trying to also change the way that they work through the exercises that we have together. So that was just another thing that I was just thinking about on trust and solidity, like going back to the beginning of our conversation.
Doing the funder, they're also accountable to the network, same as the organization are all accountable to Arts Collaboratory or to each other. Dune is also accountable, and we, before the network, had another organization also we used to fund it, and we were like, okay, but I mean, if you don't want to do this exercise of accountability, you have to be out, and we kind of kicked them out.
For that, but yes, I do hear the stories. But even the funder in the Netherlands really gave us a green light in that sense. Since then we were able to bring in another funder, not on that scale, but we invited a few funders to join study threads, to join our conversations. For them, and like this is what we call unlearning. We're all in this process of unlearning our existing paradigms and trying to think more radically, or imagining a different world. Then it's a bit too ambitious, but we're exercising it.
No, it's the best. So I had a last question about hosting practices. So I don't know if you want to answer or if you want to go directly to the question if the public has some urgent question. Yes? Yes? Okay, there's a comment, so maybe we will start like that.
First of all, hello everyone. Thank you, Omar and Daleen. It was amazing talk. I had a little comment actually because both of you agreed on the fact that you want to dig in a hole. And actually, we had a great example not really long ago in Palestine when 6 Palestinian prisoners went out by digging and in the hole actually with a spoon and you were talking about the metaphor, now it's oxymor. So they were digging in the hole to have their freedom. So yeah, I don't agree with that with you guys, but it was a really amazing talk.
But maybe that hole we wanted to dig is just to escape free also.
Bueno.
Yeah, I mean the prisoner's escape was definitely a climax. Like it was just like everybody was so excited about the freedom, the potentiality to break from an Israeli prison that is so highly secured. I think everybody was glued to the TV at that time. But for me, it was maybe just on a very personal base. Like, yeah, that was after the May events. But right after the May events, like when you're in crisis or when you see so much destruction, we're still human in the end. So, you know, as organizations, we have to, you know, we had all these media come in and ask us, and we have to say, oh, we're going to rebuild. But I just wanted to disappear for those months. I was just exhausted and I didn't know about Palestine. But of course, like we all come out of it again. And it's, I mean, yeah, the prisoners' escape definitely gave us a little bit more hope that some freedom is possible, even if it's for a few days.
I just wanted to say I'm very happy to be on that panel with you, Aline, even though you are over my head. But I'm very happy.
Likewise.
Yes, I'm happy also to have you and Omar. And so I think we can continue the conversation over drinks and nibbles. But maybe I want to like have it there because also in both the conversation we were having, we were talking about like hosting and how important it is to have like to have events or to have this kind of generosity to be hosted or host, so that to sustain like kind of this connection with other, and how Beirut, which used to be this party city, and I think is not anymore, and how in retrospect you realize how important it was to have these spaces, whether for partying or maybe in Bethlehem it's other ways of gathering that you have to be, to connect. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
Yeah, I can start. I think, I mean, hosting for me personally is a big part of like who I am. I love to host people in my home, like feed them, and just have conversations and gathering. And when I went to Darjasa, that was actually what they do. It's a residency, so part of our practice is to host artists, like physically in a space, accommodation, and we very carefully plan out the residencies and with hosting comes facilitation, like how to facilitate works or conversations with the community, especially in like an international artist that's less familiar with the context. We really dedicate that first week or those first couple of days to host them, like having breakfast together, inviting artists to be with us, going out on a walk and a tour, meeting organizations. So that's really important to start building connections and exchanges between visiting or guest artists at the space in Bethlehem and with the local community. With that, also in Arts Collaboratory, hosting it comes in. We've learned a lot over the years that when we're working in with such a big group, especially like during assemblies, hosting goes down to the levels of how we facilitate conversations, how do we invitations and issues to come out. We all, not all of us, a large majority of us actually took a workshop called The Art of Hosting, and it really opens up avenues or ways of thinking of how to facilitate conversations and how important the little details, whether how we sit together, how to create spaces for those vulnerable and uncomfortable conversations to come out. So I do think like hosting is very much something that accompanies me throughout my practice and work through different ways, again, through food, conversation, and also eating and so on. Bethlehem is a very small town. Now it's starting to sort of have a few bars and pubs, but it's continue in Darjaster, like our work and hosting in the family home on that capacity and creating gatherings and exchanges with the participants. It's definitely a way for community to be together to, yeah, like, I mean, I know Omar said earlier, you know, practice isn't just about being that's a different type that was based on trust and other contexts, but here being together and all the informal parts, you know, like having a drink and nibbles after an event is so important, and that's part of, you know, what we consider in our practices as well.
Yeah, having drink and nibbles is practice for me too. But don't understand me wrong. But it's very important to have drinks and nibbles, and also, like you said, hospitality comes naturally for us. And it's like when we invite people to a festival, it's not like we get invited to a festival. Like we invite people to a festival in Lebanon or Palestine. We bring them from the airport. We're taking them to our mother. Then we go have dinner with them. Then we put them in good hotels. And then we offer them drinks. And then when we go to a festival in France, you arrive with your luggage and you take a train, then a cab, and then you give the receipt, and then you go and you find that they put a banana on the table, saying that is this is a gift from the festival, and also for for the drinks and nibbles and the parties in the studio that were an essential and crucial part of the studio life. It's also, we tried to find as much way to give to the city by hosting the city in the studio, because we do believe that by giving as much as we can, it's a way of getting back, not only from the city, from, I don't know, from the universe maybe, but the only way of getting back is giving something. So we try to give as much, and this was our main sustainability strategy. Give, we get back.
I like this strategy. So thank you very much, both Aline and Omar, and hopefully one day you will be with us, Aline, for the nibbles and the drinks.
We can start dig a hole.
Yes, let's dig.
From Palestine to Lebanon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.